What's up, guys? I'm Laura from Reading in Bed, and this is going to be the BooktubeBooker Book Tag. Hopefully, I got that right. The original, if you haven't seen it yet, is by David of The Poptimist, and he is always out here trying to gather information and, kind of take the pulse of the booktube community, what I like to call the literary or grown-up booktube community in particular. And he set up a Google form where people can input their answers. So even if you don't want to make your own video, you can go and contribute to this. And it seems like he was inspired by his own lack of inspiration with book prizes and long lists, etc. this year. So he wanted to see if we, as a community, could make our own. So he came up with some categories that are, generally the types of categories you see with book prizes. And we, in the booktube community are going to give our own answers. Now, there's a couple. Setting up any kind of award, you have to kind of make tough decisions. And so he did not limit us to just books from this year, but sort of strongly suggested we only pick books from this year. So that's what I've done. I have limited myself to 2018 and kind of late 2017 with like a small amount of cheating. If I was truly saying my favorite books in some of these categories, I would be going outside of this year for sure. But that's what he's trying to do, is replicate kind of a book prize based on this community. So I'm going to try to stay within that. And then he's also kind of added a couple of questions on the end, which I have to agree with Steve Donahue's assessment that they don't really belong as part of a Booktube Booker. They are almost more of a Booktube Emmys kind of situation, which I could see being a lot of fun, but could also quickly devolve into drama. Anytime you have a community sort of giving itself awards, it quickly becomes a popularity contest, which actually, like any kind of prize is anyway, but then, people feel left out. Again, with any kind of prize, particularly book prizes, people start, counting and quantifying and checking quotas and stuff. I'm not saying we shouldn't do it. I love drama, so, someone wants to organize that, go for it, but, yeah. Anyways, that's all I'll say. I'll just start going through. There's 10 questions, some of which are sort of favorite book based, and then, like I say, some are sort of getting more into evaluating what's happened in the community this year. So, we'll start with favorite fiction. So this is really my only big cheat because I'm going with Drive Your Plow Over the Bones of the Dead by Olga Tokarczuk. This is an advanced copy, and it doesn't come out in North America until 2019, but it is out in the UK now in a sort of nicer, like royal blue kind of Fitzcarraldo edition. But yeah, I had to go with this one. This is my favorite. This was like just such a great reading experience. It stuck with me. It inspired me to go down multiple, internet rabbit holes after, even though it's fiction. Like often it's more nonfiction that will get you to start researching and looking for things. But the character in this book is really into astrology. Like into doesn't really begin to cover it. I am skeptical would also be an understatement for me. But I can't help myself now. Now I'm just looking up all this stuff and really embracing my identity as a Virgo, which is like the boringest of all the signs. But anyways, I ended up looking up my full chart and finding out that not only is my sun sign Virgo, but I'm like Virgo for almost everything. So yeah, I'm a super boring person, whatever. But yeah, just for the voice, for the sort of genre bending, for the writing, for the how she weaves in a lot of really heavy and blatant social commentary without it feeling like it's heavy and hitting you over the head. This is just, get your hands on this. If you're in North America, get it when it comes out. I think it's February 2019. Okay, favorite nonfiction. Now, from here on out, I'm not going to have a lot of books to show because a lot of these were library books. But my favorite nonfiction was the autobiography of Gucci Mane, which actually pulled me out of a big blogging slump. It was the first review that I posted on my blog after a hiatus of a couple months, I think. And even though it's called an autobiography, it was written with / by a music journalist, and it really shows. I went into it not knowing who Gucci Mane was, literally had no idea, had never heard his music. and came out of it just, again, like I ended up fascinated with astrology after reading the Tokarczuk, and I ended up fascinated with Gucci Mane and trap music after reading the autobiography of Gucci Mane. So it's really well written. It is not, or at least it doesn't come off as just the sort of like PR sort of stunt that a lot of celebrity books come off as. Yeah, and I mean, I wish I had it because it has a great cover and an even better author photo on the back. It's worth it for that alone, I would say. Number 3 is favorite debut novel. So I'm going with Freshwater by Akwaeke Emize, which was also a library book. I think I've talked about it a little bit. It's a book that it's hard. It is hard to understand, but in some ways it's not. You can view it as a very not standard, but you can view it as a coming of age story. Of a teenage girl who goes through some trauma, who immigrates, goes through all these changes and has to deal with those in her life. Or you can view it from a perspective of mental illness, that she's got some dissociative identity disorder going on. Or if you read interviews with the author, you can start to view it from Nigerian kind of mythology and cultural stuff with Obanjis, which if you've read the classic Things Fall Apart, there's some aspects of that too. I know a lot of people, especially Americans, I think, read that in school. So if you remember some of that stuff about Obanjis, which is, I guess the Western equivalent would be changelings. It's, when a child is sort of like taken over by some kind of evil spirit. There's a lot more to it than that. So you can view it that way, or you can view it through the lens of gender. We've got a character who, I don't know if the right word would be gender fluid or transgender. The author is also transgender, uses the pronouns they, etc. So, and I find, what I found with this book is that you can take any or a combination of those kind of perspectives and apply it. It doesn't, if you want to just view it as coming of age story, you can, and you're not gonna miss out on anything. I mean, I guess you will, but as a reading experience, you don't miss out on anything. And it is just written so well, that she can weave in all of that and keep the story going and keep the character going. A character that's kind of split into different personalities is quite an achievement for a debut novel. So yeah, very, very powerful, very immersive, very highly recommended. Okay, let's see. Number 4. Now, number 4 is favorite poetry or short story, which I think they need to have their own, so I'm just going to give them their own. So for poetry, I'm going to go with Whereas by Layli Long Soldier, which I believe, yes, it was a recommendation from someone on Booktube, and I can't remember her channel name, so I'll try to put it below. But it was really good. It was taking, and this tends to be the kind of poetry I like, where a poet sort of takes an existing document, form, something, and just plays with it and pulls it apart. So in this one, Long Soldier takes, I believe it's the text of an official apology that came from the American government under Obama, and I can't remember if they were apologizing for something very specific, residential schools or whatever they called them in the States, or if it was just sort of more of a blanket, sorry to Native Americans. But anyways, it was a very official kind of legal document apologizing, and like many legal documents, it uses the word whereas a lot. So she started there with that word, whereas, what does that mean? And just throughout the poems, not all of them call specifically to that document, but many do, and it kind of comes in and out. So, from that perspective, it becomes more than personal. A lot of the poems in there were personal, but they're all tied back to sort of this document and this idea and this, and that just tends to be, it helps me get into poems. If there's nothing like that tying it to something, I often find it very difficult to, I'm well, how am I supposed to, where do I get in? How do I start analyzing this sort of free form bunch of words? But when a poet starts with something like that, it really helps me as a reader. So now, short stories. Now, I read a lot of short story collections this year that were older, like kind of classics, like Eileen Chang, Love in a Fallen City. I read a Chekhov collection, but going with sort of the recent stuff, I've got another Olga Tokarczuk, and this is this is what the finished copies look like. So this is Flights. This one, the Man Booker International. It's sort of, I mean, it's questionable whether you can really call this a short story collection. It's sort of essays, short stories, fragments, something, but I mean, I think there are a couple short stories in here and some standouts that I still remember. There's one about a family that's on vacation on a very small island, and the mom and child go missing for days or maybe even weeks, and the dad's like looking for them, and they, it's like impossible to go missing on this island. Like, it's too small, there's nowhere to hide, and yet somehow they do. And yeah, there's another story about a professor who, marries one of his students, but it's not the story of that. It's the story of many years later, where the professor is now very elderly. The former student is middle-aged, and like it's sort of the end game of that very common trope, both in fiction and in life. Yeah, so this is just like an astonishing collection. It wins awards for reasons, and highly recommend it as well. Okay, let's see. So I think we're on number 5. Okay, so number 5 is work in translation. You can see my problem here, right? I've already mentioned a couple of works in translation, so it's sort of difficult for me to pull some of these categories apart. But since it gives me a chance to mention this book again, I'm going to mention Songs for the Cold of Heart by Eric Dupont. I had to give my copy back to the library, and I think as I ranted about on Twitter, you can't find it. It's shortlisted for the Giller Prize, and it's put out by a very small press, so I do not think they were ready. They were not ready for the demand that this book is now inspiring, but I think it's coming back into stock, or it should be soon, and I will be buying a copy. If you are a fan of John Irving, and in particular, if you are a fan of The Hotel New Hampshire, which is my favorite, you have to read this book. You have to. It's not just like in the style of The Hotel New Hampshire. It's like a love letter to The Hotel New Hampshire. It references specifically The Hotel New Hampshire. And it much more strongly and specifically references an opera called Tosca, I think, which I knew nothing about, but that didn't take away from the experience. I was just so overjoyed to see all these references to Irving and to my favorite Irving, which is not like really the most famous or well-known Irving. So really, really rooting for it for the Giller Prize. Number 6 is favorite graphic novel. So that's going to be Snot Girl, of which I've read volume 1 and volume 2. That was another BookTube recommendation from Shawnee Reeds. I'm almost considering going and buying, like, I know there's individual comic books out that have come since volume 2. I'm like, should I go buy them? Like, I never buy individual comic books, unless it's for my kids. They're just like, they're so expensive. But I'm thinking about it. I probably won't. I'll probably wait for volume 3, but it's a graphic novel. It's by the guy who does Scott Pilgrim, which I think is quite well known. Snot Girl probably isn't, but it's about fashion bloggers. So yeah, I'm all over it, and it's very weird. It is very graphic, like not just in the graphic sense, but there's like nudity and sex and stuff. So I have to be careful, having them around the house, because my kids are drawn to anything like that. Ooh, what's this? Like, no, you can't read Snot Girl. Okay, let's see. Number 7 is favorite book covers. So thankfully I do have a copy of this. So this is My Year of Rest and Relaxation by Otessa Moshfegh. I recently finished it, loved it. Might do a full review, because I know some people, like 2 or 3 people at least, are kind of interested in what I have to say about this one, just because I've really built up like how into reading this book I was. So the cover is interesting. The credit for it says jacket art by Circle of Jacques Louis David, portrait of a young woman in white, 1798. So a couple of things. The fact that this is a painting from 1798 really surprised me. I thought this was like a modern, painting or whatever in the style of, just because, I don't know, there's something about the chair that looks very modern. Like, that looks like a chair you would just see in someone's house. The fact that what she's wearing is like extremely sheer, like now I'm like, is this a nightgown or what is this? And just, I don't know. The style seems like they've taken an attractive girl and actively tried to make her ugly in some way. Like, I think it's just like the hair looking all greasy and stuff, which is totally appropriate for the story, by the way. The other thing, though, that I had to Google, because I was like, what the heck does this mean? Circle of Jacques Louis David. That's who it's credited to. So what that means is Jacques Louis David was, I guess, a totally famous painter of the time. I'd never heard of him. Jacques Louis David to me sounds like if you were trying to make up a name of an old French guy. But he was a very famous painter. But with this particular painting, no one is sure if he did it, but it's definitely in the style of this guy. So when they say circle of, it means it was either him or someone in his circle, like a student of his or someone who was influenced by him. So I'd never seen a painting credited that way. Probably just haven't paid attention. But yeah, so I mean, just aesthetically, I like it, and just all of, you know, the sort of interestingness of the art piece is really cool too. And you know, we've got that nice bright pink. Okay, number 8 is okay, so now we're getting into sort of the weird category. So this is favorite author, but it's considering not only their work, but also like their social media presence and interviews with them and stuff. Now, I mean, obviously for me, like considering that kind of stuff, it's going to be Jonathan Franzen, but he's been pretty quiet lately. He did have that one profile a couple months ago that I really liked, but he's not really doing a lot of publicity. He did have I think, a book out this year of essays, but he's not really making the rounds right now. So I mean, technically it's him, but I will also mention Sarah Nicole Prickett, who she doesn't have a book, and I don't know if she's working on one, but she writes a lot of criticism and essays and that kind of thing. She's often in book forum and just, you know, Hazlitt and places like that. So I'll see if I can link a few of my favorite articles by her below, but she's one of my favorite people on Twitter. I often, you know, kind of retweet her. And then the other one I'll mention is Joyce Carol Oates, and I know she's kind of reviled sometimes for her Twitter presence for, you know, saying things that she probably doesn't mean to, but they come off as racist or sexist, and I'm like, you know, she's like 80. You know, we gotta, yeah, anyways, I don't want to get too far into that. But the reason I'm mentioning her right now is because her beloved cat, Cherie, is nearing the end of her life. And so I am very closely following her on Twitter right now as we're hearing about, you know, her vet visits and sort of, you know, just sharing pictures of her and stuff like that. Cherie has always been a strong presence on Joyce Carol Oates' Twitter account. So yeah, I'm, you know, thoughts and prayers to Cherie. Okay, let's see. Number 9 is your favorite Booktube video. So, you know, here's where we get into things that could potentially be controversial or whatever. This was an easy one for me. It's The Death of the Book Hall by Memento Mori, and somehow he managed to make a video that's in the style of Natural Born Killers and Nine Inch Nails, kind of like earlier Barry or Baz Pierce stuff, but also very much his own. Like no one else could really make a video like that, I don't think. And also pulling from current events, because it featured like forest fires and firefighters and stuff like that. And then he even dressed up as a firefighter for Halloween this year. So, you know, he's staying on brand, but it's a great video. I'll link it below. And then finally, number 10 is your favorite new to you booktubers. So I'm going to cheat and mention 2. The first is another book vlog. So Rick is not new to me at all, because he's one of sort of the OG book bloggers here in Edmonton. He's been blogging since like 2012, but he keeps like deleting and abandoning book blogs, so it's sort of hard to trace that history back, but he's finally made the leap, and I think he's feeling pretty comfortable here on Booktube, so that's a good thing. Hopefully he'll stick around. And then secondly, like actual new to me, is Snow White and the Seven Shelves, who I found through her Charlotte Bronte versus Jane Austen rap battle. I don't think I need to say much more, but you know, go check her out. She's also got, you know, Charlotte Bronte trying to get Jane Austen a date. She's got a John Green versus Rainbow Rowell rap battle that came out recently. Yeah, some very, very creative, very funny stuff. So that is it. This got very long, so I'm going to end it before we hit 20 minutes because I hate hitting 20 minutes. Thank you for watching.